I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we'll start with the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. The lands we know today as the Township of Centre Wellington have been home to Indigenous people since time immemorial. We acknowledge that we are on the treaty lands and traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. With increasing encroachment by non-Indigenous settlers in the Township of Centre Wellington, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee could not continue their traditional lifestyle and settled in their villages along the Credit River and in the Grand River Valley. These Indigenous nations uphold their treaty rights within our jurisdiction. Today, the Township of Centre Wellington remains home to Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to share and respect Mother Earth and are committed to building constructive and cooperative relationships with Indigenous nations.
Thank you, Councillor Jefferson. Addendums and corrections to the agenda.
Sure.
Okay. Disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Okay, seeing none. Now I'd like to welcome everyone to the public meeting of Council under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act, 1997, as amended. The purpose of the meeting, this is a public meeting of Council held under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act, 1997, as amended. The purpose of this meeting is to give the public an opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, and make a representation on the development charges background study and proposed bylaw. Council will not be taking any action on this report or bylaw at this time. Notice of public meeting. The DC background study and bylaw were posted on the Township website on December 19th, 2025. A media release and social media posts were released on the same day. Notice was given in the Wellington Advertiser, a local newspaper, on January the 8th, 2026, and developer virtual meeting occurred on January 21st, 2026. Prior to its presentations, prior to receiving the public comments, we will ask our consultant, Daryl Abbs, partner in Watson Associates Economists Linked, to do a brief presentation of the findings of the study. So I invite Daryl to the lectern. Welcome, Daryl.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of council. Pleasure to be here before you this afternoon. Okay, so we'll be going through a brief presentation which summarizes the development charges background study and bylaw that was posted on the Township's website, as mentioned. In addition, and as I will explain, there was an addendum, so some adjustments made to the initial calculations in the background study, which I will speak to. Next slide, please. Yep. I'm just so used to saying that these days. I just click right. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about why we have this public meeting. We'll provide a brief overview of development charges for yourselves, for the public that might be listening. We'll talk a little bit about some of the legislative changes that have occurred over the last few years to the Development Charges Act. We'll talk about some of the implementation matters, some of the policies we're considering as part of this bylaw. Then we'll talk about the growth forecasts and the proposed calculations that are set out in the background study and the addendum background study. I'll finish off with a survey of development charges in neighboring communities, and then happy to answer any questions. So the public meeting is a requirement of the Development Charges Act. It is a mandatory meeting that we have so that council and the public are able to provide comment and feedback and ask questions on the detailed background study. The background studies are typically 200 some odd pages, so they are quite lengthy. So this allows us to provide a good summary of the information set out there and answer any questions. And so prior to council passing a development charges bylaw, the background study needs to be on the website at least 60 days prior. We have met that requirement, and as I'll go through, we've actually have an extended period of consultation through this process. So as mentioned, the development charge background study was first released on the website December 19th. We had a stakeholder meeting with the development community on January 21st. Subsequent to that, we received a number of letters and comments from the development community on January 30th, February 2nd. We met with township staff and went through those comments and questions, answered all those questions and put those answers on the township website. And then as well released an addendum report, which made some revisions to the calculations in the report and policies in the bylaw based on some of those discussions we had. Okay, and that was posted to the website on February 6th. The anticipated date for bylaw passage was going to be February 23rd, but through the discussions with the development community, what we heard was wanted some additional time. And so in consultation with township staff, we're looking at now considering the bylaw on March 23rd, which is the last possible council meeting before the bylaw expires. So the bylaw will need to be passed on that date. Okay, so an overview of development charges. Development charges are a revenue tool used by municipalities to recover the capital costs associated with growth, new development. So we have new subdivisions coming to the township, new businesses. Because of this new development, we need to build infrastructure as the township. And so the development charges are to recover the capital cost of that infrastructure. These costs are in addition to what a developer would normally pay for as part of their subdivision. I'll talk a little bit about that later. There's some legislative changes that are more prescriptive on what we need to include in the background study to explain that, something called the local service policy. So we'll talk a little bit about what we've proposed for that. Municipalities are empowered to impose these charges via the Development Charges Act. It's what guides the calculation of these charges, what guides the implementation and the application of the charges once the bylaw is passed. Typically and historically, development charges were calculated and imposed at the timing of the issuance of a building permit. But again, we'll talk about some of the legislative changes that have changed that. So this schematic really says is the money has to come from somewhere. And so on the top bubble, we have to service new growth, new users, right? If we have new development, we need to build infrastructure, we need to build water, wastewater, roads to accommodate that development. To the extent that it's related to growth and new development, we can utilize development charges to pay for that infrastructure. If we don't use development charges, you're still going to need to accommodate the growth. You're still going to pay for the infrastructure. The money has to come from somewhere. If it's water and wastewater related, it'll come from rates, water, wastewater rates. And if it's a tax supported service, it would come from taxes. Okay, and so to take the detailed calculations and development charge study and boil it down to the simple graphic, we take the costs associated with the new development divided by the amount of the new development, and we get a development charge per unit for residential growth and a development charge per square foot of buildable of gross floor area for non-residential growth. And so to get into a little bit more detail on that, the first thing we need to do is identify the amount, type, and location of development. And so we'll use existing plans or growth strategies to identify what that growth is going to be. That's set out in Chapter 3 of the background study in more detail in Appendix A of the background study. Once we know how much growth the township's anticipating, we need to identify the servicing needs to accommodate the growth. And then item 3 says, well, what are those specific capital costs of those projects that are required to meet the servicing needs to accommodate the growth? And so Chapter 5 sets out all of the detailed costs and projects that are anticipated to accommodate the growth. Once we identify those costs, we need to make a series of deductions. So any portion of the costs that are funded with grants, subsidies, or other contributions, any of the portion of the costs that benefit the existing community. For example, if we take a building, knock it down and build a bigger building, we need to give credit for the fact that we're replacing something that was already there. So that's benefit to existing development. As part of the calculations, we have to look at our historical level of service, take the average historical level of service that we provided over the last 15 years and make sure we don't exceed that. If we do, we need to make a deduction for that as well. And then any balance in the DC reserve funds need to be deducted from the calculations. Once we take those costs, we make all those deductions. We then have the net growth-related costs associated with new development. We then allocate it between residential and non-residential benefit, divided by the growth in each category to come up with the charge. And so when we're looking at development charges, the Development Charges Act lists 19 eligible services. And so what we're looking at here is water, wastewater, services related to a highway, which is really roads, transportation, fire protection services, and parks and recreation services. What's not listed, but what is eligible, is classes of service. So it can be any combination or components of these eligible services. So what we have is growth studies, which is a combination of a number of these services. We have public works operations. And then what's also not listed here is land. Due to some of the legislative changes, we did include land as a class of service as required. So I'll move through some of these slides a bit quicker. I know through previous presentations, I've explained in detail a lot of the legislative changes. It's set out in detail in the background study. But starting in 2022 with Bill 23, there were some additional exemptions and reductions brought in to the Development Charges Act. I'll talk a little bit about what the end result is because it does go back and forth, but I'll give you kind of the end result of what the exemptions and reductions are today. One big change here was that the development charges bylaw used to expire after 5 years. Now it expires after 10 years. You don't have to wait the whole 10 years to update your bylaw, but you can if you choose to. With respect to affordable housing, it's one of the exemptions that was initially brought in with Bill 23. The definition that was first implemented wasn't received well by the municipal community and some others. And so the province heard from the municipal community and some others and decided, okay, well, let's make the definition of rental housing or affordable rental housing, affordable owned housing based on incomes. And so to boil it down, there's a bulletin that the ministry posts on their website. If I am a developer and I'm going to sell my unit at or below that threshold, or if I'm going to rent my units at or below those thresholds, then I meet the definition of affordable housing. I have to enter into an agreement to ensure that my units remain affordable for a period of 25 years, and then I get an exemption from the development charge. Bill 185 then came in 2024. Reverse some of the things brought in by Bill 23. One of the big changes here was it brought in a process for minor amendments to development charge bylaws, which I will summarize in a second. So Bill 17 came out in 2025 as we were working on the study, brought in an exemption for long-term care homes, changed the definition of capital cost, which I'll talk about on the next slide. It brought in this more enhanced process for simplified DC bylaw amendments. So when we pass a development charge bylaw, we have to undertake a background study. We have to have a public meeting. We have to wait 60 days from the background study to pass the bylaw, and that bylaw is appealable to the OLT. Under this process, for 3 reasons: if we want to repeal or change the expiry date to allow for the 10-year period, if we want to repeal the indexing provisions at any point, or we want to decrease the development charge for one or more types of development, we can go through this simplified process where a bylaw just comes forward to council, you pass the bylaw, provide notice, and that's it. There's no appeal to the OLT, and there's no public meeting required. They also brought in the deferral of the development charge payment from the time of building permit now to occupancy for all residential development. And this is the big change that municipalities are dealing with. So if I'm building residential development, come forward, I don't have to pay my development charge at the time of building permit. I can pay at the time of occupancy, okay, subject to some requirements of an occupancy permit. And then there was some legislative installments for rental housing, institutional development. If I'm building those 2 types of development, I get to pay my development charge over 6 equal annual installments over 5 years. We used to be able to charge interest on that. We can no longer charge interest on that. There's something called the rate freeze for certain types of development. If I proceed through site plan or zoning bylaw amendment applications, my rate's frozen at the time I submit my application or my complete application. The township will go through, approve that application. Once it's approved, then I have 18 months to pull the building permit, and I get to pay at that frozen rate. Okay. What the legislation now says is I calculate that frozen rate or the rate as it was today. So when we pass the bylaw, whatever rate's lower, that's the rate we implement. Okay. Grouping services for the purpose of credits, I'll talk about on the next slide. And then there's some enhanced reporting requirements for the treasurer's statement. all of the development charge reserve funds. Every year, we have to take 60% of the balance in the reserve funds and allocate it to different projects. We don't have to spend the money, but we do have to allocate that. We are allocating those funds to projects that are identified typically in the development charge background study. Okay. And then every year, once the development charge bylaw passes, we can index the charge to try to keep pace with inflation rather than redo the study every year. And so previously there was an index for Toronto and Ottawa, which tracked non-residential building construction prices. Now they've added a London index, which could be used. And finally, with Bill 60, which we were anticipating the passage of as we were preparing the study. And so we were able to implement the changes relatively quickly once these changes from Bill 60 came into effect. One of the things was the addition of a class of service for land acquisition. So what we needed to do is we needed to identify all the capital needs for land for all the different services and group them together for the purposes of the calculations. In addition, when we look at Appendix B to the background study, we have to look at the level of service that we provided over the last 15 years for all the different services except water, wastewater, and stormwater. We have to take land out of those calculations. Okay? So that's something that we implemented in the December 19th background study. The merging of credits. So if I'm a developer and I go and I build a water pipe that's in the development charge background study, it's a growth-related project. If I build that, I get a credit for that. So if I pay $1 million to build that pipe, every time I go pay my development charge, I don't pay the water component until you draw down on the $1 million. Now I can also draw down on the wastewater component as well. So merging those two services together. There's a requirement to detail how we calculate the growth and non-growth component of the charges. And so in the background study, in one of the appendices, we have detailed tables on how we've approached the benefit to existing calculations to meet that requirement of the legislation. There's some further annual reporting requirements for the treasurer's statement. And then lastly, the local service policy. So the townships had a local service policy in their current development charge background study, and that really sets out what's the developer's responsibility, what do we put in the development charge study. And so now with the legislative requirements, it does require us to be a little bit more specific on what happens in certain cases. And so what we've done is worked with township staff to refine that local service policy, which I'll speak about in a moment. Okay, so I mentioned I would give you a summary of all the exemptions in one, because it's a little bit easier than going back and forth. And so upper tier, lower tier governments don't charge each other development charges, similarly with school boards. If you have an industrial building, you can expand it up to 50% and you don't have to pay a development charge. Anything after that, you'd have to pay a development charge. Development of lands for use by a university. Universities would be exempt from development charges. In addition, colleges are also exempt in light of the fact that they're crown corporations. You can add up to 2 apartments in an existing or new single, semi-detached, or row house, and you don't have to pay development charges. And that can be 2 units in, let's say, 2 basement apartments, or 1 in the unit and 1 in an ancillary structure such as a garage. You can add 1 additional unit or 1% of the units in an existing rental residential building. So think rental apartment building, you can add 1 unit or 1% of the units and be exempt from development charges. Affordable housing that's required through inclusionary zoning, nonprofit housing. There's a discount for rental housing. They get a deduction based on number of bedrooms, could be 15% up to 25%. Affordable rental units, affordable owned units, as I mentioned, and then attainable units are also exempt. However, the province still doesn't have a definition of what that means. When that definition comes in, they will be exempt from the bylaw. So, Council does have the ability to reduce the charge in whole or in part for different classes or types of development. You can phase in the charge over time. But what we've proposed in terms of the exemptions are listed here. So place of worship for purposes of a churchyard or cemetery, non-residential farm buildings for bona fide farm uses, or agricultural research buildings for use of a university. public hospitals, hospices, silos for use for industrial, commercial, or institutional uses, and shipping containers used for non-residential purposes when they're an accessory use as defined by your zoning bylaw. So I mentioned the local service policy, some more legislative requirements. What we included in the development charge background study on December 19th, what we were trying to do is trying to manage dealing with developer-initiated urban boundary expansions. And so we go through all this master planning work, development charge background study, all this financial analysis based on the urban boundary, and then a developer initiates an urban boundary expansion. How do we deal with that? How do we pay for the infrastructure? So what we initially came up with was a way in which we could treat that, all that needed infrastructure as a local service developer required. And so what we heard through the development community discussions was they were against that approach. And then working with township staff, understanding that there are some policies coming forward to deal with growth management and allocation, we feel that there's enough there that you're limited in your risk with respect to those urban boundary expansions that we can remove that from the local service policy. So that was a major change that we made in the addendum report. Some other changes were to clarify the wording as to when certain things would be a local service, and then works such as local or collector roads, water mains, et cetera, that are fronting a development are also now a local service. One of the other things we worked with township staff in creating is a deferral policy. And so under the legislation, under Section 27 of the Act, you can have early or delayed payment agreements. And so working with township staff, we developed this deferral policy to kind of put some parameters of when you'd consider that. And so for non-residential and mixed-use developments, so for non-residential component of a mixed use, DCs would be deferred to occupancy. The intent there is that if under the legislation all the residential development pays at occupancy, it would make sense that the non-residential component would also pay at the same time at occupancy. For non-residential developments generally, the DCs would be paid in equal installments over 6 years, as long as they met certain criteria noted in the policy. Affordable housing. So I mentioned there's already mandatory exemptions for affordable housing if you meet the criteria. The province is bringing in a definition of attainable. Once we get that, those will be exempt. But in addition, as part of this policy, looking at taking that definition set out in the bulletin, and as long as the house price would be within 20% of that approach, then they would meet this definition of affordable housing for the deferral policy, and they would get to pay in equal installments over 6 years. Okay, so some additional relief here. And then generally some other policy components that unpaid DCs would be added to the tax bill, as we're allowed to do in the Development Charges Act, and that the developer may initiate the application process by providing an application and deferral letter, samples of which are included in the policy. Okay, so then getting into the calculations, so I mentioned we released the background study on December 19th, 2025. Stakeholder consultation January 21st. Based on the letters, based on the feedback, I went back with township staff, and then we revised the calculations. And so a summary of that addendum report is listed here. So again, removing the developer-initiated urban boundary expansion component from the analysis, but maintaining the requirement to update the studies. So I mentioned if there's going to be an urban boundary expansion required by the development community, the township would need to update the master plans, update the development charge background study, all of which is required specifically because of this development. And so the requirement would be that they would pay for those studies, but not all the infrastructure as we remove that. There was some land acquisition costs. Again, trying to deal with the new legislation. There was a project or two that was still in the water service that needed to be moved out to the land acquisition component, so we did that. There was some additional deductions for benefit to existing on some of the water and wastewater collection projects. There was a couple duplicate projects where they were duplicated in name, but didn't impact the calculations because they're identified as a local service. So we cleaned that up. and then made some revisions to the level of service calculations for recreation facilities and changed the timeline to pass the bylaw from February 23rd to March 23rd. And so when we're looking at the actual calculations of the development charge, we're looking at managing growth over the next 10 years, about 7,400 people and about 3,250 residential units and just under 2.7 million square feet of non-residential floor space. Out to 2051, that's about 20,559 people and just under 8,800 units and just over 7 million square feet of non-residential floor space. This table here summarizes the calculations and the charges that would be implemented in the bylaw, just showing you that there's a number of different residential categories here. So single and semi-detached dwellings, other multiples, which is townhomes, row houses, and then you have your large and small apartments and special care, special dwelling units, and then your non-residential charges on a per square foot basis. And so if we take a look at the single detached charges to compare with your current rates, you can see your current rates for fully serviced property with water and wastewater are about $37,000. $37,518. Initially with the calculations, they were about $48,000, but with the revisions down to $47,541. So an increase of about $10,000 per single detached unit. When we're looking at the non-residential charges for fully serviced property with water and wastewater, going from $12.21 per square foot up to $14.51 per square foot. Okay, so to see how that compares to some of the other municipalities in the area, we've included this survey. You can see the current charges are at the red arrow, so kind of the lower end of the middle, and then the calculated charges that I mentioned up in that blue area. So basically the middle of the survey. When we look at the non-residential charges for the commercial development charge per square foot, we see again kind of that lower middle, not changing in relative position, but slightly going up to a couple dollars per square foot. And then the industrial charges per square foot, again, kind of in the middle of the survey. Okay, so just want to wrap up by saying, in terms of the next steps subsequent to this public meeting, again, happy to answer any questions right after, but then we've moved the anticipated council bylaw passage to March 23rd in response to some of the comments and questions from the development community. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
What I think we'll do, Daryl, is we'll do delegations, and then that'll give the opportunity for council to get the whole flavor of it, and then we'll have opportunity for council to ask some questions. So right now we'll move to delegations, and we'll start with Joe Harris, Grand Highlands Home Builders Association. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. How much time? Okay, I should be good to go. Okay, thank you. My name is Joe Harris, and I'm second vice president of the Grand Highlands Home Builders Association. I'm also the director of land development at Gemini Homes, which is a longstanding member of the Grand Highlands Home Builders Association, and we are also a home builder here in Centre Wellington. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of our association regarding the recently released development charges background study prepared by Watson and Associates. Our association represents the residential construction industry across Guelph, Wellington, and Dufferin. Our members are directly responsible for planning, financing, and delivering new housing in your communities. Housing that supports local growth, builds for all demographics, and contributes to the long-term economic strength of Centre Wellington. As council may be aware, we are facing a generational housing crisis. Despite this, thousands of newly completed homes across the province remain unbuilt or unsold, and projects are being delayed or canceled. The common thread driving this slowdown is affordability and broader economic conditions. Today, roughly 30% of the cost of a new home is attributed to government-imposed charges, including taxes, fees for applications and permits, and development charges. These are built directly into the cost of a new home and ultimately paid by the home buyer. Against this backdrop, the scale of the DC increases proposed in Center Wellington's background study is deeply concerning and poorly timed. The background study proposes DC increases of 28% for single and semi-detached homes to as much as 60% for multifamily and apartment units from your existing 2026 rates. When compared with Center Wellington's last DC bylaw update in 2021, these new rates represent increases between 100 and 142% over a 5-year period. If development charges have doubled in just 5 years, it is reasonable and frankly alarming to consider where they may be in another 5 or 10 years as a mechanism to fund growth. There are several important realities facing our industry that Council should consider. First, housing starts and sales remain well below long-run averages across Ontario, and they have declined sharply in the recent years. Center Wellington is no exception. Based on township data and according to your 2024 housing needs assessment, Center Wellington averaged 273 new residential units annually between 2015 and 2024. In the last 2 years, building permits for new residential units fell below 200 units per year. Second, the bricks and mortar cost to construct a home is relatively consistent across the communities in which we build. What does vary, however, and what contributes to whether housing is viable and affordable are land costs, approval timelines, and government levies such as DCs. Third, development charges are a direct flow-through cost. When DC increases, new home prices increase. At a time when affordability is already strained and builders are actively trying to reduce prices to stimulate demand, higher DCs directly undermine these efforts. Fourth, the proposed development charge increases are inconsistent with Center Wellington's own housing needs assessment. That assessment identifies the need to diversify the township's housing supply and expand opportunities for more attainable ownership, affordability, and rental housing. Increasing DCs does the opposite. It raises the cost of new housing and makes it more difficult to deliver the types of ownership, rental, and affordable units the township has identified as a priority. This disconnect is particularly evident in the proposed 60% increase to the apartment service class. Apartments in stacked towns are typically among the more attainable built forms, yet they are facing the largest proportional increase. As it relates to DCs in general, we have become overly reliant on a growth pays for growth policy. While development charges are intended to fund growth-related infrastructure, they are entirely dependent on continued development activity, especially in a township like Center Wellington. Consequently, when growth stalls or declines, the anticipated revenue from DCs simply does not materialize. Recognizing this reality, some other municipalities in Ontario, such as London and Hamilton, have recently implemented or are considering meaningful DC reductions to stimulate their housing starts. We acknowledge and respect the township's need to plan for long-term infrastructure funding. However, we strongly encourage council and staff to prioritize those items that are core growth-enabling infrastructure, for example, roads, water, and wastewater. In closing, given current economic conditions and an already stalled housing market, now is not the right time to increase development charges to this magnitude. Doing so may delay or cancel planned construction and slow the delivery of much-needed housing in Center Wellington. Accordingly, our association respectfully asks the council to consider these local impacts. And at a minimum, we'd be asking for the adoption of the new development charges bylaw to be deferred to allow additional time for industry review and for a more careful examination of the township's capital budgets over this study period. We do recognize that it's now been expanded an additional month, so we do appreciate that, but we would still like to ask for more time. Our association would also welcome the opportunity to work with the township and find balanced solutions that support infrastructure needs and housing affordability. On behalf of our members, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, next we will go to Joseph Puopolo from Urban Planning Corp, Inc., Polocorp. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. My name is Joseph Puopolo, co-CEO of Polocorp. I'm here to talk about urban boundary expansions as it relates to specifically the DC background study. I guess through further conversations with both staff and also the consultant, just have some curiosities in terms of what this means practically in terms on a go-forward basis. I would echo some of the comments that my colleague Joe Harris has made regarding housing costs and where things are going. But I guess my curiosity is just in terms of, or worry of creating a two-tier system of lands that might be within the urban boundary or to be added within the urban boundary, resulting in DCs, and then a second class might be coming in through another mechanism, and how those are treated. So I recently read the addendum, and we'll have further consultations, but I'm just concerned about creating two tiers of land within Center Wellington, not presuming the outcome of any of these urban boundary expansions. That would be the first point that I wanted to make. The second point ties into just in terms of some of the background studies. I recognize that some of the background studies were created specifically the wastewater treatment report that underpinned the DC background study. And I noticed at the time of the drafting of the wastewater treatment report that that there was multiple active urban boundary expansions that were contemplated at that time. And just from a high level perspective, I think just appropriateness and fairness, those should have been contemplated as part of the as part of the DC background study, recognizing that they're not resolved at this time. Specifically around water and wastewater treatment, and I highlight those specifically in terms of, I understand there's a local servicing policy that contemplates the ability to build roads and services, but I think water and wastewater is a little bit of a different animal from the standpoint that it can't be immediately done by a developer. We can't come in and, let's say, for example, add additional water capacity or add additional components of wastewater treatment plant. So I see that as a little bit of a different animal, and it needs to be contemplated as such. So through further consultation, and I will be reaching out to staff after seeing the addendum, I just wanted to highlight those distinctions. Just as a high level, what we're seeing in industry-wide is looking for more flexible approaches to looking at development charges. And then the other thing that I just wanted to highlight to council through further consultations, both with the provincial level and also the federal level, I just want to highlight there's a possibility that the entire development charge funding formula is going to be changed. So I know our good friends, and a lot of hard work has been done, put into this, but I just wanted to highlight for the benefit of everybody, it might be changing in the near future. So more changes to come depending upon the regulatory as well as funding model coming down from there. I guess just as a closing comment, look forward to building housing in Center Wellington, looking forward to delivering there. And I'm just curious in terms of understanding how some of the mechanics of some of these addendums will change. And on the basis of that, I'll provide additional comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Okay, so no questions at this time. We'll just thank you for your comments. We're going to go to Marcus Gagliardi. Is Marcus online? Oh, hi, Marcus. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to speak, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. Marcus Gagliardi with Cachet Homes. Appreciate everybody's time this afternoon, and apologize I couldn't be there in person. It's tough to follow up those two presentations. My colleagues have captured quite a bit of the comments that we had on the DC background study and bylaw that we've submitted in writing as well. I'll keep my comments specific then, because they've touched on some of the higher level items. Cachet owns lands on Side Road 15 in Irvine on the south side of Side Road 15. And we've got two parcels of land, some that are inside the urban boundary and some that are out on the west side and the east side of Irvine Street. The lands that are inside the urban boundary are draft plan approved and they have zoning in place. They were draft plan approved and zoned last year. Some of the DC projects that were originally scheduled for 2031 around those lands have now been moved to 2034 and 2035, which doesn't necessarily fall in line with the servicing program and the velocity that we want to bring those lands online. So we've specifically asked for those projects to be brought back to the 2031 timeline. That would be more in line with when that servicing is needed, when that housing should and will come online. I believe both Joes have touched on the urban boundary policy or descriptions in the DC bylaw, so I won't touch on those. And again, we've submitted our comments in writing. The only comment I'll make, and I think it's abundantly clear in the other presentations that you've heard today, is it's very difficult to make the dream of home ownership a reality today. Things are expensive for young, elderly. Every demographic is struggling with housing. So when you have an increase like the one that's on the table today or in the DC background study, that objective or that mission becomes that much more challenging. There's only one person that can absorb those costs. It's not the builder, it's not the developer, it's eventually going to be the homeowner, which is not easy to do in this environment. So, we'd ask council to consider that. We don't disagree that DCs are required. An increase is probably likely required to bring on the infrastructure to accommodate growth. But what are the risks to the municipality if the growth doesn't come at all? If the incentives to build in your township are no longer there and the canvas to build housing becomes that much more expensive, if builders, developers start to turn off the taps altogether and the revenues from DCs and building permits and application fees slowly starts to dwindle, what are the risks to the municipality in that situation? And again, it's not Watson's responsibility to prepare that in the DC background study, but it is a risk, especially when DCs are increasing by 28 or 30 or 35% overnight. So we'd ask you to consider that. I'm not sure if there's a study or a scenario that Watson could run for you to review, but we see that as a potential risk. So I'll leave it at that. Again, I think the other gentlemen have captured a lot of the comments that I had, so I don't want to reiterate them. And I appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Okay, I'm going to look in the audience. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak to this item today? You're welcome to come up. If seeing no, I'll give you going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, so at this point in time, I would look to council for questions and comments. You can ask of our consultant and staff, and if they're. So I'll open it to council. Council McDonald.
Through your Mayor Waters, this would be to Nelson Watson. Daryl, please, if you have a moment. Can you speak to the funding formula and the fact that it could be changed? Like, are we going through all this and then, things are changing weekly, it seems, and yeah.
Yeah, so through the mayor, so we understand there's discussions ongoing with the development community and the province, along with some other technical experts, and there's also discussions happening with the federal government as well. My understanding is that development charges aren't going away completely, that there might be some changes to development charges, maybe the approach to the calculations, as we've seen over the last few months. I would say that we can only react to the environment we live in when the bylaws passed. And so today we have a formula for development charges. We have a legislative framework for development charges, and you would pass a bylaw within that framework. If there are changes that come down the line, a lot of times what happens is the changes to the legislation might take effect on your next bylaw. Or if it's significant changes, then an addendum or an amendment might be required. But given the new legislative provisions for if you're going to reduce the development charge in whole or in part for any type of development, you don't need to go through the detailed process. It could be as simple as staff bringing forward a bylaw to amend the bylaw without having to do a background study, without a public meeting and all that. So in terms of reacting to any changes, I think you can do so in a fairly easy manner if those changes do come forward.
Councillor Welton.
Thank you, Mayor Waters, and thank you, Daryl. Just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the comment we heard from one of the delegations about the apartment buildings and multifamily rates going up a little bit more than the single family rates, and just if you could explain why that is and if that could be looked at in terms of any adjustments. Thank you.
Sure. So through the mayor, the development charge calculation, what we do is we take those capital costs associated with new development on the residential side, and we divide it by the amount of population growth we have. And so then we get a development charge per capita. So whether you're going to be in a single detached home or an apartment, it's the development charge per capita. And this generally follows the need for the infrastructure, right? If you think about water, wastewater capacity, it's typically designed per person. And similarly, when we look at things like parks and recreation, where you need to build, a certain number of parks for every 1,000 people. So it's all based on number of people. And so there's that nexus between the capital cost and the need for the capital cost. And so then what we do is we take a look at Statistics Canada data, historical Statistics Canada data over the last about 30 years worth of data on different types of units. So single detached units, apartment units, townhouse units. And we look at the average persons per unit. And so that development charge per capita is multiplied by those people in those units. And so there's not really an ability to change that calculation per se, because the Act requires us to make that nexus between the need for service, the increase in need for service, and the charges that we calculate. And so it is appropriated. It is following the methodology that's set out in the legislation that's been before the tribunal and accepted as the approach.
Councillor Evoy.
Thank you. Through you, sir. I do have two, so if there's someone else, I'll save my second one. With regards to affordable and soon attainable having different, I'm hoping that you're going to say yes. Do we know yet that attainable will have even more than affordable, so that we can continue to make it easier for builders to accommodate a certain demographic of homeowners?
So through the mayor, unfortunately, I can't say yes or no. We don't know what the definition is going to be. I know the province is looking at the definition and what that means, whether it's certain types of land that might be considered attainable. Because
sorry to clarify that. I was asking, do you think that we'll have better rates for those, whatever that ends up being?
Oh, so the through the mayor, so affordable housing, and if it meets the definition of attainable, would be exempt from development charges, so zero.
Totally exempt. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the follow-up question, or the second question, so when we joined a lot of our developers not long ago online for this discussion, one of the things I heard on that meeting was, we're not saying don't raise them, because that's just not logical and not something that we can manage, but maybe raise them in increments over 2 or 3 years. Has that been actually looked at as an option, so we can continue to move forward with raising the rates, but in a way that's not going to cripple the developer as well, while still serving township?
Yeah, so through the mayor, that's always council's prerogative. You have the ability to phase in the development charge if you so choose. Our role in preparing the background study is to show you what the full cost of development is. So every time you build a single detached home, it's X amount of dollars is what you need to invest to accommodate that growth. And so if council chooses to phase in the charge, you can phase it in over 1 year period, 2 year period, 3 year period, whatever you deem reasonable. Understanding that if you phase in the charge, reduce it or discount it, that amount needs to be funded with other sources, that being taxes for tax supported services and rates for rate supported services.
Councillor Wilton.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. Just on slide 24, you had the adjustment of active transportation deductions and revision to level of service calculations for recreation facilities. Could you just provide a little more detail on what those two items are and what the changes were, please?
Sure. So through the mayor, what we had in the background study with respect to active transportation, that was more of just a clerical adjustment. We have a couple columns in the chapter 5 of the calculations which show the deductions. We have one one for other deductions and one for grants, subsidies, and other contributions. So for active transportation, we just moved them from the other deductions column to the grant, subsidies, and other contributions because it's anticipated that one of the projects might be grant funded or funded from community funding. So it was just more appropriate to put it in that column. Didn't change the calculations. With respect to the recreation facilities level of service calculations, one of the items brought up by the development community was a review of the level of service calculations. The replacement value we had for greenhouses was too high, and that was just an error on our part. And so we went back, corrected it, didn't change the calculations at all in terms of what the development charge would be, but we did refine that level of service calculation.
Any further comments or questions? Oh, Councillor Addams.
Thank you, through you. And specific to those affordable and attainable classes, where they are able to kind of spread that out over the 6 years, do they need to ensure that that remains affordable or attainable within over those 6 years, or just kind of that first year that it hits?
Yeah, so through the mayor, that would be set out in your policy. Because this is something over and above what we're deciding to do or what the legislation requires to do, you do have the ability to define that in the policy. I think you would want to, in kind of the same vein as the legislation has that requirement, so that someone doesn't say, yes, it meets the affordable requirement, 2 years later sells it and now it's not affordable. I think you'd probably want to incorporate that.
Councillor Welton.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. I'm just curious about kind of the survey of municipalities that you did near the end of the slide deck. And then I looked up Collingwood and Innisfil just because they seem like sort of similar municipalities. And Innisfil is at about 53,000, I think, for single family or single house, and Collingwood is at 104. I assume they must have some wastewater thing going on there. But so I'm just curious, in your experience, if you see, like, even with the ones you included, we're still at the lower end, getting a little closer to the middle. Do you see that kind of risk that one of the delegates brought up of, in terms of, it looks to me like we're kind of comparable across similar municipalities, so I'm not sure there is that risk, but maybe you could speak to that a little bit, please.
Yeah, so through the mayor, I mean, from my perspective, development charges are to recover the capital costs associated with development. So let's put aside water and wastewater because that's a little different. But for things like parks and recreation services, if the development doesn't come, you also don't need to spend the money to accommodate the development because it didn't come, right? And so, so in terms of those services that are non-water, wastewater, maybe a little bit roads, then I think there isn't really risk because you just wouldn't spend the money to accommodate the development. In terms of things like water and wastewater, there is a bit more of a risk because water, wastewater, and to some extent roads, you have to invest in that infrastructure before the development comes to pay the development charge. And so building in things like capacity into the water, wastewater treatment plant, building things like pipes to accommodate some of the development, there would be some risk on water and wastewater if that didn't materialize. More so if you have debt payments on the water, wastewater. So some municipalities have very large investments into debt for water and wastewater. They have a bigger risk because they still need to make those debt payments whether or not they have growth. If in your case, it might be more of a question of how to change the phasing and staging based on what type of development or where the development's coming. But for most services, it wouldn't be a risk, in my opinion.
Any further comments or questions? Councillor Jefferson.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. Mine's just a question about the indexing that came into effect in January, the 4%. Was that taken into calculation with the numbers, like doing the DC study in December, and then that happened in January, at the beginning of January, and then does it affect the 28% that we're looking at now, or was that taking into the calculation?
Through the mayor, I'd have to go back to double check specifically if that was taken into account into the survey, into the rate comparison. But I believe it would be included in the rate comparison, but I can double check and confirm that subsequently.
Councillor Welton.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. Still on slide 24, the removal of developer-initiated urban boundary expansion requirements. You commented that the requirement for updates to township studies would be included. So could you just go over that again and clarify what you mean by that and who would be paying for those studies and how the timing, I guess, it sounds like it might get, you'd be doing study after study potentially. So I'm just curious if you could clarify that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so through the mayor, so where we started out was if there's a developer-initiated urban boundary expansion, it's going to require new infrastructure that wasn't in any of your master plans, the development charge study, et cetera. And so we started out with saying, okay, well then if that comes forward, it's not in our plans, it's a local service, you build all the infrastructure, and that's that. So we, through discussions, through understanding of the new policies that you have coming forwards to manage some of the growth, we says, okay, well, if we remove that, there's still a requirement to update these studies, right? And so the development comes into the urban boundary. Because of the urban boundary expansion, you need to update your master plans, you need to update your development charge background study, et cetera. So if, let's say, that urban boundary expansion comes in and you just did the water wastewater master plan last year, well, now you're gonna have to spend money to update that master plan. And so that would be a requirement of the developer to fund that. If that water wastewater master plan is now more than 5 years old, now it's starting to get into the realm where you're going to be updating it soon anyways. And so we thought that would be more reasonable where the township would fund that through development charges. Okay. Similarly, with the development charge background study, same approach. If we need to update the development charge background study to include projects and we just updated the background study, that would be a requirement. Otherwise, if it's more than 5 years old, then it would go in and be funded by the township through development charges.
Councillor McDonald.
You, Mayor Waters. One of the delegations mentioned 100 to 140% increase since 2021. Can you verify that in any capacity, please?
Yeah, so to the mayor, I can't speak to the specific numbers since 2021, but I would expect a significant increase as we've seen this across the province, across Canada, really. And it's mainly driven by the increase in cost of infrastructure. Once we hit COVID, so the 2021 study, we would have been using numbers that were 2019, 2020. We didn't really see that huge increase in costs. And then once we hit 2021 and onwards, we saw a significant increase in cost, sometimes doubling cost of water, wastewater infrastructure, roads, which comprise the biggest component of most development charge background studies. And so, yeah, so since 2021 and 2021 dollars, yeah, we would see a substantial increase as we've observed across Canada that the costs have increased substantially.
What for our area? What number is that the province has defined as affordable housing? From a dollar point of view.
I'll pass that to Dan. That's okay.
So the most recent numbers for Center Wellington were to affordable purchase price is $436,400. And then monthly rent from an affordability perspective depends on the number of bedrooms, but it ranges from about $1,200 a month to $1,400 a month.
So for however reason you were going to get into that number, that those units wouldn't be subject to DCs.
That is correct. If you're within those numbers through the DC Act, you would not pay development charges. And what we're suggesting through the DC deferral policy is that if you're within 20% of those numbers, then you would be able to pay your DCs over a six-year installments. So the 20% increase to those numbers means a purchase price of roughly $524,000 and then rent between $1,500 and $1,700 per month. So if you can get within that realm based on current numbers, which is reviewed annually by the province, then you would be able to enter into a DC deferral agreement with the township. And that is not legislated. That's something we're encouraging to do locally to encourage development.
And then, so in a development, like obviously the development applications we have within the urban boundary, I know that folks are still making plans that way. So there is that opportunity for a portion. It doesn't say, we're not suggesting it be the whole development, but maybe a percent or proportion of that development could be that and would be not subject to DCs or have a break on DCs. So maybe that's something obviously that the development community needs to think about it a little bit. You know, it's I think it's definitely something tangible, but it's also the idea of, I know this council is very encouraging and trying to have sort of mixed ability for housing, mixed opportunities. So that gives a variety of opportunities from a costing point of view for not only for the developer, but for the community to get into the community if there is truly affordable housing. But I know that's a challenge given sort of the cost, but I think there's an opportunity there for the development community if they want to pick up on that. Councillor Evoy.
May I ask you a question for qualification or clarification there? So you said a percentage, perhaps we can offer the developer a percentage, whatever that number is. That means if they have a 30 units and our percent was 1 and they have 3, the entire development would receive that or just those 3 units?
It would be those particular units. So say, sorry, apologize. Yes, if a development, there were, I'll just take a number, if there are 500 units and maybe 10% of that, there was an opportunity for affordable housing, then that 10% would be subject to that. Yep. Okay, any further comments or questions from council? Council Craddock.
Thank you. And through you, just looking at those deferral options or payment plans, essentially, how does the township manage the cash flow to ensure that the infrastructure is there when needed?
Through the mayor, that is something our treasurer and finance team would have to be mindful of every year in setting the annual budget. We do a development charges cash flow analysis every year as part of the budget, and it just means for those specific types of developments, we are restricting our cash flow. So we just have to be able to manage that accordingly.
Any other further comments or questions? Okay. We've received written comments to date, and we'll continue to receive those. And so far they've been attached to report CAO 2026-02 dated February 9th, 2026. We're still open to dialogue and discussion. Obviously, we're not making a decision today. We're receiving for information. So continue to have this open dialogue that way. At this point in time, if there are no other comments and questions, I will declare this meeting closed. And we will take 5 minutes to allow the gallery to clear, unless they want to stay for the rest of the meeting. Thank you. Okay, thanks. We're back again. We're going to move down to presentation and announcements. And at this time, I'd like to invite our MPP, Joseph Rosinski, to speak to a Ministry of Transportation funding announcement. Welcome, Joseph, and it's very nice to see you at our council.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, members of council. It's a privilege to be here to share some exciting news. I'm very thankful to be here at the chamber. First time in the chamber. You're the fourth chamber I've been to. Puss Lynch is still holding out on me, but I've got a great relationship with Puss Lynch Mayor and Council. Before I begin, I want to start by saying if you're ever applying for funding or if there's a project that you believe the province could be involved with, please let me know about that. I know the mayor has my cell number. Many of you have my cell number. If you don't have my cell number, make sure you get it. I want to hear about those. My job is to be a champion and an advocate for this community. So if you've got something you want raised as an issue, I'll make sure that the minister responsible for it is aware of it. With that, as you know, the community like this is growing across Ontario, and they're preparing for growth. We have a housing shortage, and communities like Centre Wellington are stepping up to fill that gap. However, we also know that growth does not pay for growth. Minister Flack has said that many times, and you heard a bit of that today. And infrastructure costs are high, maintenance costs are also high, and the reality is, depending on property taxes and development charges, it is not realistic to fund all of that, or even often that's counterproductive. That's why our government's made record investments in municipal infrastructure over the last couple of years. Most of you were with me a few months ago when we announced over $6.8 million for housing enabling infrastructure here in Centre Wellington. But when I speak with residents, I'm sure you hear the same. When they talk about growth, preparing for growth, that infrastructure, they're concerned about existing infrastructure as well, making sure that that infrastructure that already exists in our community here in Centre Wellington is prepared for that growth, the increased traffic, etc. That's why I'm happy to share today that through the Connecting Links program, our government will be granting the municipality $1 million, $86,040 to resurface Highway 6 in Fergus between McQueen Boulevard and Queen Street on the south end of Fergus. I was visiting Hammond Manufacturing today down in Guelph. I was driving on that little stretch of Highway 6 on my way there, and there's definitely a few potholes. So it'll be great to get this project forward, and congratulations, it's great news. Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. Questions or comments for Joseph while he's here? I see a couple of hands here. Councillor Eboy.
Well, it's an absolute thrill to be able to say thank you. We'll always take more, and we'll always keep asking for more because we can use more. But we appreciate this $1 million, $1,086,000. It's an odd number. Don't know how you got it, but we'll take it at 40. We'll take it. And on behalf of myself, and I'm sure my colleagues, thank you for that.
That's great. And you know what? For the 2026 year, this is one of 21 communities, I believe, across the province that are getting funding through this program. So it's great that you're one of them.
Councillor McDonald.
Through you, Mayor Waters. Thank you so much for coming today. That is definitely a good news story. I know the residents in that area are probably going to be thrilled and will be thrilled to see it accomplished. I also want to thank you and your staff. Every time I reach out to the office, I get a response right away, and I do appreciate it. It doesn't matter what it is in the community. I just really appreciate that I can get a very immediate response. So thank you.
The very first meeting I had with Premier Ford, he sat me down and said, "Joseph, I want you to be a champion for your community." I said, "Premier Ford, I can do that. That's why I'm here." So,
any further comments or questions for Joseph? My understanding is we're going to take a picture with you, Joseph. So
that'd be great.
I don't know who's coordinating this, or I see Kendra back there. So, I also want to get council in here as well. So I'm not sure how to. I guess maybe up in the horseshoe here we'll do that. So
great.
Okay, we will now move down to 6.2, Mayor, County Council report, and a few things. Since Diane was here, we passed our budget, county budget. It was a little bit higher, but at 3.6. Increase to the county portion of the property tax. Some of the highlights included 58.3 million in roads and capital infrastructure and public works facilities, including the construction of the new public works garage in Erin, and also reconstruction of 4 bridges on Wellington Road 109 in Arthur, and reconstruction of Main Street, Palmerston. Moving down, there was 4.3 million capital investment towards projects that improve road safety measures to manage speed utilizations, and those where funds were derived by the automatic speed cameras. So there'll be 7 projects identified that throughout the county. There also creation of 46 new childcare spaces, that being in Mount Forest and Wellington Place. 31 in Mount Forest and 15 at Wellington Place, which is sorely needed. And 10.6 million in capital repairs for the enhancements within the county social and affordable housing units. So that one's definitely is a good swing at it, but there's definitely need for more monies in that area. There was increased funding for homelessness prevention and supportive, including additional rent supplement units and enhanced winter response plans to house a higher number of individuals experienced or at risk of homelessness. And it's been a really tough time, as we know, just given sort of our continual, I'll call deep freeze that we've been in. And looking to, I think we're going to have a bit of a break starting tomorrow. So, but that still is the fact that we still need that type of housing for our community. Improvements to ambulance services through addition of 9 new positions, including 8 new paramedics to support increased call volumes and to improve response times. And there's also additional resources for nursing and resident care at Wellington Terrace long-term care home supported by the government of Ontario. And we're also, and this is a good news story as well, recycling collection for those businesses in the county's downtown areas. And I think a lot of us became aware of it when some of these programs rolled out, and some of the businesses weren't included, but now they are included. So, so at that, I'll open it up to questions or comments. Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Not through you, Mayor Waters, to you. Thank you for the update, and I'm happy to hear about the paramedic positions. I know this has come up actually at Safe Communities, and these are additional 9 positions, so that's great to hear. And homelessness is ongoing, and but I do really support the rent supplement that is going on, and thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Addams.
Thank you, through you. At this month's Healthy Advisory, we had Ian Duncan present our 2025 Water Conservation Annual Report. Lots of good news there, and obviously very meaningful because of everything that we're hearing, particularly that's coming out of Waterloo region, but things are looking good there. The committee did give their endorsement, so I believe that should be coming to council soon. And the second item, Matt Tucker was present, and he presented the new 2026 ICE allocation and recreational facility allocation policies. These used to be one policy, now they're 2 separate policies. Lots of engagement with all of our user groups. It sounds like a lot of good feedback from there, and has been perceived well. So that engagement was good, and the committee also gave endorsement of those. So.
Thank you for that update. Councillor Evoy.
Thank you, through you, regarding DEI. Not unlike Councillor Adams, the DEI committee did meet and discuss the ICE and facility allocation report that will be coming back to council shortly. And it was interesting, and it shows me that our advisory committees can do really good work when they're given the right information and the right materials to do so. And there's a really good and healthy discussion about that. Also, I'm going to read this. A reminder that we have Kevin Sandy coming for an hour of education. He's going to be talking about the creator's game and sport of lacrosse through the lens of a Haudenosaunee, or through a Haudenosaunee lens. Kevin's going to share his insights, cultural knowledge, and perspectives about the game, which, by the way, is rooted in respect, balance, peace, and connection to the people who now play the sport. He's going to illustrate how everybody has the responsibility to uphold the values of this creator's game. You can attend that event. It is free on February 16th. And if you're looking from 12 to 1, it's 1 hour. If you want more information, please visit centerwellington.ca Community Connect.
Thank you, Councillor Evoy. Any, yes, Councillor McDonald.
Through you, Mayor Waters. Victoria Park Senior Center, we met February 2nd, and the active living show is coming February 27th. It's a great way to get out. It's at the Sportsplex, and it will be everything for senior and active living in the community. And that's it.
Thank you for your update. Councillor Wilton.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. Just a short update from the Fergus BIA that they did adopt their, or not adopted, but they talked about their new bylaw and asked some questions, and it seems like that all went quite well. So that should be moving through the system to get approved for having that new bylaw in place. And really, that's just updating a quite dated bylaw for the Fergus BIA. So that's moving along quite well. Thank you.
Any further updates from council as it relates to your committees? Okay, thank you for all that. Now we'll move down to there's delegations, which we have none. Consent items. Consent agenda items are considered routine in nature and are voted on collectively. However, many members of council may request one or more items to be removed from consent agenda for a separate action. And I'll read the recommendation. That the Council of Township of Centre Wellington approves consent agenda items 8.1 through 8.4. So do we have any questions or comments as it relates to, sorry? Oh, I could do that, but I was just putting that out there, but I'll take a mover. Yes, Councillor Wilton, secondary Councillor Evoy. Any further comments or questions as it relates to those consent agenda items? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's so moved. Thank you. Okay, consideration of reports. We're going to move down to item 9.1, Confederation Park Revitalization Plan. Very excited to hear about this. It's been in the work. I think there's going to be a dance party after this. So, okay, and we have a report from Lucas Rogerson, Manager of Parks. Welcome, Lucas.
Well, Mayor and Council, thank you both so much for having me here today. And I am pleased to present a long-awaited and anticipated report and strategic plan for revitalization for Confederation Park. As we all know, Confederation Park is a well-loved park within the town of Fergus, and the township engaged earlier or in late 2025 GSP group to lead community engagement and provide concept and revitalization plan for Confederation Park. The plan outlines a phased approach to enhance accessibility, safety, and environmental stewardship while preserving the park's natural character. Joining me today, we have the team from GSP who will walk you through their process as well as the recommendations and the steps moving forward. And I'm pleased to have on the call with us today, Kara Singbeel and Mandy Cadger. And I'll pass it over to them for the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas, and thank you for your time today. As Lucas mentioned, we're from GSP Group. We're a landscape architectural firm based out of Kitchener. I'm Mandy Cadger. I'm a landscape architecture manager and senior landscape architect, acting as the project lead.
And I'm Kara Singbeel. I'm a senior landscape designer, and I've been the project manager on this project.
We're going to go next slide. I think we'll probably go through this fairly quickly so that we have more time for the discussion. So we're going to touch on some high-level points. And if there's anything that we didn't pick up on yet, please ask us at the end, and we're excited to answer any questions you have. So this is really a guiding document, and it's really intended for the township to use as a guide for future investment in the park space. It's not meant to lay out things in detail. It's meant to capture the vision of the community as we've gone through the engagement process. It's really a framework for future investment. So there might be things and details in here that you didn't see. That's the reason why, because we're keeping it fairly high level. This is something that you're going to go back to in the future. Every time you go to think about investment in this park, you can go back to this document. You can remind yourself of the guiding principles, the values that were captured during this phase, and it helps you make decisions in the future when maybe new funding opportunities come about. Or new ideas come out from the community. You can go back to these guiding principles to help make those decisions.
Next slide. So a bit of background information that we gathered prior to working on this document is we reviewed a number of existing reports and background documents as noted on the screen here, as well as we conducted our own site visits in October of 2025. Yes, we went multiple times just to get an idea of how people use the space. And then some general research of the regional and local history of Center Wellington, the park history, and its existing uses. And some of our initial observations were the natural forestation of this space within downtown Fergus in Center Wellington, the lack of accessibility within the space. So is this space able to be enjoyed by users of all ages and all abilities? Wayfinding in through the park and through the trails located within the park. And then, of course, the vast number of invasive species that we noticed throughout the entirety of the park. Next slide, please. So for this plan, we conducted a large community engagement process, which included an online survey. This survey was available for about a month from October through to November, which provided us with a lot of feedback from the community. They were able to put in their own 2 cents and kind of share what they thought should or shouldn't happen in this space. We conducted some interest group interviews. This included groups like the Grand Valley Trails Association, the St. James Church located adjacent the property, as well as the Grand River Conservation Authority, so we could better understand some of the regulations with the floodplain that's located within this space. And then, of course, it concluded with a design charrette where we had over 50 participants of the community attend between the 2 sessions that we hosted back in November to kind of design this space with them. Next slide, please. So through the community engagement process, we developed 3 guiding principles based on what we heard from the public. And these were safety and accessibility. This principle emphasizes creating a welcoming environment through clear sight lines, equitable access through hazard-free and accessible pathways, and thoughtfully placed lighting. The next principle is connection to nature, which is the emphasis of designing spaces that encourage visitors to slow down and observe their surroundings and experience quiet reflection and mental restoration. And the third principle being land stewardship, which is the emphasis on thoughtful, long-term decision-making that supports healthy ecosystems, respects community history and use, and preserves the landscape as a shared resource. Next slide. So moving into the next couple slides, we're going to talk about the revitalization plan and its implementation strategy. So we developed this based off of a few factors, one being the community's priorities. So that's emphasizing the natural environment, serving people of all ages and all abilities, and then improving existing amenities within the space. Other factors that helped us with the phasing would be costing and funding. So we took a look at that after we've developed the plan, and then working on how flexible timelines could be incorporated into the implementation of this plan. Next slide, please. So now I'll introduce the community-supported plan that was developed through the design charrette and the community engagement process. These are general park improvements. So there's a few here. I'm just going to do a high-level overview of this and kind of break down some of the thought process. So some of the general improvements include maintaining the existing forest canopy while focusing on that removal of the invasive species. And this was located throughout the park. So you'll see that with the numbers 1 and 2 on the screen. And then introducing an enhanced accessibility through a ramp located off the Queen Street parking lot. We also look to provide an end-to-end accessible path, which you'll notice is in the maroon burgundy color. And then it switches to a dark purple color. And where the purple is, we're proposing that to be asphalt only in that section as more of a formalized side of the park. There are other paths you can see on this plan in the light pink and the lighter purple. And these are more dependency projects that could happen, and we'll discuss those later on, but these are all dependent on certain things happening within the park. After that, we're also proposing replacing the existing boardwalk that's located within the park and improving its safety measures. We are proposing introducing 2 shade shelters on either end of the park so that there is a space for gathering at both the Queen Street side and the Scotland Street side. Emphasis on pedestrian safety is through the selective enhanced sightlines. So you'll notice that with the green dashed lines, where we would provide limited clipping of vegetation here in order to allow pedestrians to feel safer and see in and out of the site. We are proposing a new accessible outlook for bird watchers and nature enjoyers that can access the Grand River a little bit better. That's in the middle of the site. Enhancing water access with a more formalized, non-motorized boat launch, and that's at the Scotland Street side. That's often used already for canoe and kayak, as well as introducing nature play and gathering spaces throughout the park. So that is the quick overview of the plan, and you'll notice in our guiding document that we've broken down these improvements into almost like detailed pages, and it tells you when a project is dependent on another project or if a project can be introduced independently. Next slide, please. So it was clear very early on to us that the community cares deeply about this space and the natural aesthetic of this space. Therefore, through our recommendations within the document, we emphasize the use of natural and durable materials that will reflect and enhance the park's character and natural appearance. So some of these could be the stone dust paths made with an organic binder. So we're still using a natural material, but we're enhancing its accessibility with that binder. Wood elements incorporated throughout boardwalks, seating, and other site elements. Natural stone used selectively for features or accent pieces. And then, of course, selective use of materials such as asphalt, mainly for more formalized portions of the park. Next slide, please.
All right, so here we have a more detailed breakdown of the phasing from a cost perspective. And this was, of course, not an easy process to go through. This is our taking the guiding principles, taking the values that we heard through the engagement process of this project and prioritizing based on that. I would say that the way we tried to structure this was to outline complete projects. So these line items that you're seeing here with the cost associated with it is intended to be, to the best of our ability, what that feature would cost to implement. There are different factors that will go into this when you actually go to implement something. Again, this is more of a guiding document to help with decision making and maybe some attempting for shuffling around. If you do get funding that becomes available, you get a grant that you've applied for and it goes through, or you have a community partner that's willing to fund something, this is your way of kind of adjusting this plan as needed. But to kind of set things up with what we've heard and from our experience in the industry, this is what we would recommend as a start. And there's certainly opportunity to move around in here, but phase one is, we think, a really important phase that touches on a lot of what we heard from the community about land stewardship and keeping things as natural as possible and moving forward in a way that respects this land. So we heard again and again that let's do the invasive species removal first, and then let's see what we're working with. Let's maintain this park so that it's better serving the community from the day to day with how it is right now. So this phase is really like a startup phase, getting an understanding of what's going on, doing some extra studies, and improving some kind of more important things that would be some quick wins for the community. Then I would say the next two phases have more room to shuffle around. Phase two is really focusing on that equitable access. And this doesn't mean that the entirety of the park is going to be accessible to everyone. The intent is really to get most features in the park accessible to everyone. So having that end-to-end path, making sure people can navigate from the parking lot safely down into the park, some signage improvements, things like that. And then our phase three amenities is really more of those, how are we enhancing the park user experience? What would be some really nice things to have once the budget allows, and if the community values still support that? I'm gonna move to the next slide and we can always come back to this if we need to. We do have some dependency projects. We heard a lot about connectivity beyond the park through this process. And so we wanted to make sure that we were accounting for that in a budgetary perspective, knowing that that would be dependent on projects outside the scope of this park moving forward. So maybe that's a transportation project moving ahead. Once that project goes forward, there are things that we could do in our park to enhance connectivity, but definitely dependent on some other things going on. And then I just want to finish this conversation here with just some thoughts about phasing. There are these sort of admin and design consulting costs that are going to be inherent to implementing a project. So just want to put some thoughts out there about, it's really not recommended to do 10 phases, for example, because you're going to pay more in the long run on those kind of ancillary costs. It's really more efficient from a cost perspective to do as much as possible at one time. So just something to think about as you navigate this flexible plan. Flexible to a degree, there is still some consideration of overall cost. We'll just go to the next slide just to kind of close out the overall discussion. Is there a final slide?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Okay. And then we can always go back. I would say we got so much engagement through this project and we felt really great about going into the recommendations here. We really did think that we, to the best of our ability, captured what we heard and what made sense in this park. Thank you. That's kind of the end of the bulk of our preamble. And I really invite you to ask us anything. Here's your opportunity to dive into the details.
Thank you, Kara and Mandy. Before we get into questions, I'll just summarize also what our next steps will be after this discussion here and after today. The next steps is pending discussion and the receiving of the recommendations. We'd look to then activate the phase one portion of the recommendations, which would be completing the required site investigations, consultations, etc., and then look to the detailed design and the activation of the removal those recommendations, or the activation of the recommendations, I guess. We do have budget set aside, $150,000 in this year's capital budget to tackle this, and we are prepared to do that as well. So those are the next steps. The other items would be incorporated into future capital budgets being brought forth at that time. As well, we'd be looking and exploring for some other funding opportunities, whether it be through grants or through some funding partners through our community funding program. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and we'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Lucas and Kara and Mandy, and I'll look to council for some questions right now, or comments. Councillor Wilton.
Thank you, Mayor Waters, and thank you, Lucas and Kara and Mandy. I really appreciate all the community consultation and engagement that happened, and the charrette that I was at was really well attended and quite animated, so I appreciate that. In the phase 1, you have viewshed vegetation removal, and then the invasive species removal, and I'm just a little bit cautious, I guess. One on the invasive species removal is that it needs to be replaced with something else as you go through. Otherwise, there's so much buckthorn in there that it would actually be quite bare, and it would change kind of the whole look and feel of the park, which people really value. So I think that needs to be kind of managed carefully in terms of we're not just going in to take it all out, but how do we replace with native species and that type of thing at the same time. And then the viewshed vegetation removal, if you could explain that a little bit more, because I think that, again, if we get into trimming trees and taking any trees out near the view, like the lookout over the river, that again changes not only the look and feel of the park, but also the ecological functioning of the park, because it's quite cool and shady in there with all the trees, and that's cooling the river as well. So I'm hesitant on that piece of the lookout and the viewshed, the vegetation removal. So if you could just maybe say a little bit more about those pieces. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So if you go back to the phase 1 budget, we do also have an invasive species management plan. So money set aside so that we can bring in a consultant in the next phase. I say we as the collective we. So someone can come in the next phase, assess the extent of invasive species and propose the best way to go about that. And that would likely include replacement strategies. Exactly what you said. When something comes out, something else has to go back in. And we also wanted to be really intentional about that. So we did have funds set aside, and we even talked to a consultant that we work with frequently to get some advice from them and make sure that what would be involved in that made sense. So that was our plan there to tackle that piece of your question. And then I will say that the sightline enhancement, I don't think it's as invasive, pun not intended, as a removal as you might think. Like just removing some limbs on vegetation can open up a view without actually removing the plant. It's really an intention for safety mostly, and making sure that if we invite people to come look at a view, especially someone that might be navigating the world with wheels and they only have so many options of where they can position themselves, we're just trying to be intentional about making sure that there is a view for someone to come see and that we have that equitable access. Did you have any follow-up questions with that response?
No, that's fine for now. I have some other questions, but I'll let other people ask. Sure. So thank you.
Okay.
Councillor McDonald.
Through you, Mayor Waters. I did attend the morning charrette, and I just want to say you captured what the residents wanted. I did hear a lot of, well, can't we just keep it the way that it is? We love it the way that it is. But I do really appreciate the accessible piece here. That was the goal. And I do appreciate the work that you went into it. I do remember a resident bringing up, if you do remove the invasive species, you'll put something back and you would look into that. I appreciate that. I think it's great. I love how the budget was set up for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's very intricate and detailed. And so I guess my next question is for you, Lucas. So we have 150,000, but phase 1 is 214,260. So how do you want to tackle that one? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, I believe Adam's going to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas, and thanks, Councillor McDonald. So through the mayor, so we are having some discussions with some community partners about potential donations to fund the project, and we have to advance those discussions now that we have this plan in place. But I think that we'd be maybe approaching some of these partners and seeing if they would be interested in funding some of these works, which I think would make up the gap in funding. And just reminding also, these are quite high level costs at this time. When we get into the next phase, which is the detailed design, we'll be refining these costs a little bit, and they might be subject to change.
Councillor Jefferson.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. My questions kind of revolve around the non-motorized boat launch. I didn't see on the map where the portage route would be around the dam and then the downstream put in for the boat. And then also with the project scope, there was nothing listed in there for dam markers, awareness around a low-head dam and the dangers that also contributes to the river, because our river isn't a consistent level. It fluctuates with the rain and it fluctuates with the drawdown and everything from the dam, or the above dam from the Bellwood Dam. And then the dangers around a low head dam are pretty significant. So I'm thinking the awareness around that, rescue equipment with our fire department at the downstream launch would also be a significant factor as well. So I was just wondering how that's all being handled.
Lucas, you can chime in after, but maybe I'll take this first to say that we understand that there's probably a number of cautionary type signage that would be really valuable in the space. So we did set aside specific budget for that. Thank you for bringing those pieces up, because you know what, we can call that out in the final report, make sure we're touching on that. And I will say that in the next phase of work, when it is in detailed design, the actual cautionary signage that needs to go in, as soon as it's necessary, like the details of that signage will be decided rather in that next phase of work. But I think you bring up a good point. Let's call it out now and make sure that that's being thought about then. So we will add some language in for that.
To your comments there, Mandy, there was a discussion that would be addressed within the wayfinding signage, and the signage budget is there. So we'll take that to the next stage, but also to address the portage road. So that was discussions we had as well, and we recognized that there is an active portaging route through there, and the nature of it is to access the dam through the dam for canoeing or kayaking. That was also going to be addressed through signage design. And instead of having a fully accessible kind of pathway that routes there, to keep the nature of portaging, we would have that signed accordingly that goes through and allows the exit and entry points.
Thank you. And then just about safety equipment, just because a lot of the places for boating, when you have like a launch where people are being encouraged to utilize the facility around below a low head dam or below the dams as well, we usually have different safety equipment, emergency addresses, backboards, things like that need to be kind of in place, but it might be something that you want to consult with the fire chief at that time with. Thanks.
Through you, Mayor, we'll definitely take that back, and through detailed design, we'll make sure that that is covered. Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you, through you. Yeah, very excited to see this project here, and I think it was done very thoughtfully, and again, echoing all the same sentiments about all the community engagement. Even after the report was posted today, I still see lots of online chatter and stuff, so it's good. It's a very well-loved park and a very beautiful park, and I think I'm very happy with the design and the phased-in approach. Just to clarify, so I understand the dependency pathway is based on like an item. So for example, the lookout, let's say, but that proposed dependency pathway would be accessible, right? So yeah, okay. So it's not just the main. Once that dependency is added, then that would remain accessible, which I love, because within your report you talk about, accessible for all and all ages, and yeah, like it's really great. Like, you know, just there's the boating, the fishing. I think you've captured a lot of just the activities and stuff that take place. And I think this will just remain a great park, but will just kind of increase the access for those with all of it, like with different abilities. So I think that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Wilton and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. Just had a question about the play areas, the features there, and just curious. To me, it might have made sense to have some play structure like naturalized and very low key ones, as all the community members were talking about, in that Queen Street, off the Queen Street parking lot. 'Cause it's right across the street from a number of multi-residential units. So I'm just curious if that could maybe be added in, or if why that wasn't there and why the play structures are kind of more throughout the park, which are nice too. I'd do it all. But thank you.
I do appreciate that comment. I think Kara and I, as we were going through this in the team, there was a lot of discussion, of course, on play and what is appropriate play and how much play is appropriate. So I think out of an abundance of caution, we really were envisioning those play moments happening almost upon discovery. And really not prescribed. So to try and weave it in as naturally as possible while making sure we have safe moments of exploratory play. That's where our heads were at. And I think that's why you're only kind of seeing it as discovery moments along the trail. Whereas I see where you're coming from. Like traditionally, play would be coupled with a pavilion with seating so that caregivers could sit down and watch play happening, which I'm not saying shouldn't be happening here. It just wasn't quite what we heard per se, but it's not to say that that's not an option and not another moment that play could be added. And I think maybe what we could do to help clarify that is these are the areas right now where we recommend that sort of discovered upon play, but it's not to say that through the detailed design process you can't add more play of that nature in other areas of the park. Do you think that kind of satisfies where you're coming from? I wonder what your follow-up question might be to that response from me.
No, that's good. I really like the discoverable play throughout the trail. Yeah, I just, having been in the park a lot, I know there's lots of little kids living right across the street. So being able to be in a space and still have it very naturalized and very kind of that kind of natural play type of structure, not a big colorful thing at all.
Right.
So that's for sure. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your answer.
Councillor Jefferson.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. My question was just kind of regarding the lighting. If we're going to be looking at solar or like hardwired lighting throughout the park, and if there's other options for the asphalt, if like another kind of, I don't know, hard surface that's not asphalt that could go in there, something that's more permeable. I'm just thinking from a climate lens if that's something that we've considered. Thanks.
Okay, so there's two pieces there. I'll start with the lighting and then we'll go to the path material. I would say that I know what I need to know about lighting in an overall perspective, but an electrical engineer would be able to dive into exactly, you know, the differences in the types of lighting, how much that costs, what that means from an upfront cost versus future ongoing costs associated with types of lighting features. And I would say that question is much easier navigated through that detailed design process. But there are options, and it really depends on, do you want to pay up front or will you incrementally pay in the long term for these different types of lighting? I think solar would be an option, because what we are suggesting is that the lighting would be more in the open areas where there isn't tree coverage. So like that lighting would very, very easily be solar. I just can't fully answer the question the way I want to. That's the best that I can do for now. And I think you should keep bringing that up as this process continues. I keep advocating for that. I think that's great to advocate for. And then the materiality piece, you know, I think we went back and forth about this as well. And we did thoughtfully choose where we would propose the asphalt. And in our minds, where we've proposed it is where we see a lot more foot traffic. We see potential events happening. And I'm not saying that these are going to be like big events, but I don't know, someone could be like, let's go on a community walk together, and everyone goes and walks the accessible trail together in the opening, and then you have that pavilion there. We picked it there because from a long-term maintenance perspective, asphalt is gonna be better for your money long term. And we knew we weren't going to be impacting any of the tree canopy in that open area where we've proposed it. And we very intentionally went to more of a stone dust granular approach within the trees, specifically for that reason, for that environmental reason and that drainage reason. It's not to say you can play around with that materiality, but I just wanted to let you know why we were thinking that, like from a long-term maintenance and durability perspective. Did you have any follow-ups to that?
No, thank you. That's good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Welton.
Yes, very much a detail, but maybe just to flag for Lucas moving forward. But I do know the park. In the spring, it's actually quite wet in a lot of the sections on the trail. And so I was kind of envisioning there might actually need to be more boardwalk to protect the roots of the cedar trees, because in the springtime now it gets quite trampled, which is detrimental to the health of the trees. So just moving forward, as you get into more of that detailed design, there might be some sections of the trail that need a little bit more stewardship, I guess, and might require a little more board walking or different types of trail material. So just something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll take note of that.
Sorry, I just have a quick announcement. I had to schedule another counselor meeting this afternoon, so I do have to leave. But I just wanted to thank you so much for your time and leave you in Kara's capable hands. And just another thank you, and sorry that I do have to leave early, but I'm excited to hear about the discussion.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Evoy.
Thank you. I wonder if Lucas would like to add any notes or share anything at this point with us from your lens and your department lens.
Thank you, Councillor Evoy, through you, Mayor. I'm excited about the project. I think it encompasses the intent of and the wishes of the community. I think it balances with what we are looking at to modernize our parks and to offer different types of play while respecting our natural environment and having good stewardship of the land, which we take very seriously within our division for sure. I do like the idea of creating these two separate sanctions where you have this active type of play area or park area, as well as making sure that we have the natural area. So I think we've come to a really nice balance in the plan, and we're excited as a team to move forward with it. Sorry, the lighting is what. Okay, so in terms of the lighting, I think that's something that can come out at detailed design time, and we can have further discussions of that. It was recognized that it wasn't a strong wish from the community to have lighting there. However, there are some considerations that we would take from a township portion or perspective to make sure that it's relevant to not have it and not have it within our parks. So that type of discussion will be moving forward into the design stages.
Okay, any further comments or questions for Kara or Lucas? Okay, I'm going to read the recommendation that the Council of Township of Centre Wellington receive the information Confederation Park Revitalization Plan report number CS 2026-07, and that Council endorse the Confederation Park Revitalization Plan recommendation outlined in report number CS 2026-07. Do I have a mover on that? Councillor Wilton, seconder on that. Councillor Adams, any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? So move. Thank you very much, Kara and Mandy, and thank you, Lucas, today for presenting. You can tell Council is very excited about this project moving forward, and appreciate the information provided today. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move down to item 9.2, Bridge and Transportation Network Study, preliminary preferred alternative for Bridge 21WG, 29WG, and 30WG. And I see Adam Dickerson approaching the lectern. Welcome, Adam. It's been a little while.
A little while, but it's still the same line of conversation again with bridges. So thank you, Mayor Waters and senior management for allowing me the opportunity to update you and on the ongoing bridge and transportation network study for these three bridges, Bridge 21WG, 29WG, and 30WG that commenced back in May of 2025. The bridge study team is comprised of both township staff and from a consulting team of experts from Burnside Engineering. You'll most likely be familiar with this project, as you will recall the study initiation report that I provided back in May of last year. And many of you were able to attend the November public open house at the Sportsplex. And during the public open house, Andrew Dawson from Burnside Engineering delivered study information and a presentation regarding the draft of the preferred alternatives. I have asked Andrew to take part in this meeting remotely, and in the event that there's some, technical specific questions that he could better answer than me. So just checking, Andrew, you're there? You can hear us? Okay. I can see his.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you too. Okay. Great. So I'm going to go ahead with this presentation and next slide, or if there's a clicker. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the study area, let's recap where the study area is and where these bridges are located within the Township of Center Wellington. So the study area of these three bridges encompasses a rural area of Ward 5 that is north of Wellington Road 19, just east of Jones Baseline, and west of 6th Line, and south of Side Road 20. It's primarily agricultural, and the Side Road 15 is the nearest east-west alternative to Wellington Road 19, is also in the study area. The bridges cross the Irvine Creek within the regulated area of the Grand River Conservation Authority. And it's located within the treaty lands of Indigenous communities. Oh, now I've done it. Hold on, here we go. So the study, as a recap and understanding the study process, know that it involves evaluating the two bridges that are currently closed to traffic and one that has been load restricted. The study team has considered options such as impacts of the closures to transportation, the feasibility of repair, removal, or replacement, and through engagement with the community by way of public meetings, newspaper notifications, and a project website, we've provided project information and received input from the public to consider. Then, through technical evaluations of the various problems and opportunity combinations, a preferred solution has been determined. Upon the study completion, staff will use these study results for future capital planning of the works recommended. So the municipal class environmental assessment exemption. So this project was determined to be exempt from the Environmental Assessment Act in accordance with the 2024 municipal class environmental assessment document. And however, staff is elected to follow a process very similar to that of the MECEA that involves community engagement, input, as well as background investigations. So how was the study determined to be exempt from the municipal class environmental assessment process? Well, the township must remain committed to the heritage documentation and commemoration commitments during the implementation of the preferred alternative to retain this exemption. As such, this study doesn't need to be registered with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. Study process. So you could see through this slide, this graphic, where we've made quite a bit of progress over the past year as far as different steps that needed to be undertaken. The study began with identifying the problems and opportunities presented by the closure and opening of these bridges. Since then, public's input from the first open house helped define these problems and opportunities. So we completed a series of studies and investigations to quantify the impacts of several alternatives and to see how we can address the problems and opportunities identified. We've decided on a preliminary preferred alternative based on these studies. Now nearing the end of the process, today I'll provide a summary of how the preferred alternative was determined. The next steps in the process will be considered the next steps in the process after today will take into consideration any new information and confirm or revise the preferred alternative. The draft project study file has now been made available for public review on the Connect CW web page. So consultations. Through various forms of outreach, area residents, public agencies, and Indigenous communities provided input that has been included in the evaluation through the study process. These parties were contacted through study notices on online Connect CW web page. We had the 2 in-person information centers. We received email and phone discussions as well. And that brings us to the transportation study element of the specifically. So there's a number of local considerations that influence this decision matrix. And you have a problem, and then through the study, we've determined different ways of evaluating and suggestions for combating that problem. So you have a problem like increased community commute times. Well, we evaluated those through travel time from the surrounding communities like Ferguson, Elora, and Guelph, how traffic would navigate themselves with the bridges being closed or open. There's delays to the emergency response time that we wanted to review and calculate. So we evaluated the emergency response routes to and from Fergus and the surrounding response stations, because they're not all just from Fergus there. There's lengthy detours for farming operations, because they travel slower and they have to get to their connected farming operations. So we evaluated travel time within the study area for slow moving vehicles to avoid the use of the arterial routes. Another issue that we wanted to review was the complicated routes for service vehicles, the waste collection, deliveries, buses, and this winter, all the snowplows especially. So we evaluated the impact from having those vehicles to travel around the bridges and find other routes. So then we have the bridge improvement study. So what we're talking about here is, like, if we were to replace these bridges, what variety or what type of bridge replacement might be considered. So the study team examined bridge improvement and replacement opportunities like the rehabilitating the existing structures, reviewing the potential for pre-stressed concrete girder style bridges, prefabricated modular bridges, and even steel through truss bridges. And during this investigations, options had to be developed by considering things like, the flood impacts, the service life, construction costs, capacity for the large farm equipment, pedestrian safety, long-term maintenance requirements, environmental impacts and opportunities for improvement there. So where we landed was with the investigation was a preferred structure type of pre-stressed concrete girders. And I'll provide a little bit more detail on that in a moment. So the evaluation criteria. So we've talked a little bit about the transportation and how some of those calculations were derived, or the things that we were considering. So the transportation cross-community travel aspect considers things like the emergency response times, the slow-moving vehicle accommodations, and local community travel considerations. Now, the natural environment, there's aspects that we consider in that review, and things like reviewing the environmental sensitive areas, which there are, wildlife habitats, fish and aquatic habitat, and species at risk that might be present at these bridge sites. With the social and cultural environment considerations, there's things like the social economic conditions that we're considering, the archaeological and cultural heritage, as well as community input. And finally, with the economic environment, it's the things like the capital costs, the life cycle costs of a replacement structure, and operational and maintenance costs and impacts to the local economy. So next, we had to evaluate all these different criteria and how to properly assess each of them in a strategic way. So transportation, environmental, economic, and social cultural aspects. It should be noted that there were other alternatives that were evaluated but are not present on the slide. They were determined not to address the problem at all. So you can see there's different scenarios that are preferred for different aspects being considered. So, for example, if you look at the transportation perspective, you can see that replacing them all, it scores an 8. But something else like 21WG, that's the second column, it's the shortest span bridge. So from an economic aspect, it's scored very high because it would be the cheapest to replace. So you have to kind of put all these scores together and determine what is going to have the best outcome for the future. So, so that left us with the preferred alternative to have bridges 21WG, 29WG to be reconstructed, and 30WG not to be reconstructed. So with the replacement of 21WG and 29WG, this replaces the top two bridges for transportation improvements. Bridge 21WG provides the most significant improvements to emergency response times, and 29WG, which provides the most benefit for cross-community travel, especially for slow-moving vehicles that travel within the local study area. It also aligns the best with the overall social and cultural considerations, including the community and input on those structures. With the 30WG removal, it limits the impacts to the environmental sensitive wetlands. There's a potential for red-sided dace fish habitat at that site, and the regionally significant area of natural and scientific interest at that site. It'll remain closed until the time of removal. During the time in which it finally does get decommissioned, there'll be consideration for vehicle turnarounds at both ends of that site. So vehicles like the snowplows can easily navigate and return back the way in which they came. So we also took a look at like where does that leave us with this preferred alternative as far as the capital work prioritization. So with this study area, the 3 bridges that we were recommending for the preferred alternative to be 29 WG to be replaced first, then 21 WG after that, and finally 30 WG's removal. So Bridge 29, like I said, will be replaced first. And it should be noted that there's funding currently in place right now for detailed design of that very structure for this year. So we can move right into that phase with the way the budget's been set up. And with the intent to replace that 29 WG next year in 2027. So upon completion of this study, timelines for 21 and 30 WG will be reassessed during the development of the future bridge plan, because all these studies that we've been doing over the past couple of years will impact kind of how our overall plan will look. So here we have a conceptual design of what the replacement structures might be comprised of or look like. This cross-sectional view demonstrates a 9.1 meter driving platform, and that provides lots of distance between the barriers to allow for 2 lanes of traffic to meet one another, but is also very adequate distance for the passage of oversized agricultural vehicles and their implements. And then we're also suggesting that we would go ahead with the commemorative arch detail in the barrier design, which we've done with 2 bridges that have been recently constructed in the community already to kind of commemorate that design of the arch. So with further details about the replacement types, you can see that the bridge on the top there, it's a single span pre-stressed concrete box girder, and that would be used at the one site, 21 WG, because it's a shorter span, whereas at bridge 29 WG, it would be the same bridge general type, the pre-stressed concrete box girder. Because of the overall span, it would require a center pier at that location. So that leads me to my final slide, and I'm prepared to answer any questions we might have.
Thank you, Adam. I'll open it up for comments, questions from council. Councillor Evoy.
To you, sir. Thanks so much. And thanks, Adam. I know I met you a few times at these events and at these open houses. To you and other Adam, thank you guys. It was always a pleasure to stand by you and help address some of our residents' concerns, which have again come up when people read today's agenda. And I think I'm just going to reiterate some things that I know people are really concerned about. When we look at Side Road 15 being the very last east-west road from Highway 6. It's used regularly by our agricultural community, and noting that driving patterns changed about 10 years ago when this bridge was closed. I'm not sure that it was a choice in that change. It was a necessity. We also note that 15 is much wider than both 20 and 25, and that in and of itself makes it a lot easier for and safer, frankly, for our agricultural and farm equipment to be able to pass on those roads in the most effective way. Also, there's a little small hamlet there that I want to remind everybody exists on Side Road 15 and 6th Line. There's a manufacturing business there that addresses and serves our agricultural community that's currently cut off from traffic. So I think these are points that I'm not sure, I know the work you've done. I'm not suggesting it hasn't been considered, but I think it's worthy of additional consideration. I'm going to quote, just because I took a picture of that and I know you referred to it, Adam, but from our very own report. The environmentally sensitive wetlands, potential fish habitat, and regionally significant area of natural and scientific interest at 30 WG speaks to the fertility of the soil and the cropland that's right there. It's a thriving farming area with significant agricultural activity, and I really think we need to be super cognizant of this when we're deciding the fate of the bridge. So all that to say, I humbly look with so much respect for how much work you've done to see if there isn't a better solution for this particular bridge. I think I would hope that we would consider further conversation about this before we agree to shut it down.
And any comment or?
Well, one thing I can comment on, and maybe Andrew could chime in a little bit too, with respect to the traffic patterns and that bridge in particular. There was factors in that we inputted into our evaluation, considerations not for what the traffic was, or it was indexed to what the traffic patterns would be currently. So it's not as if it was the considerations were from 10 years ago. There was considerations given for what users would be interested in having that bridge reopened currently. But Andrew, is there anything else that maybe I'm forgetting that might help provide some insight into how this was evaluated, this particular bridge in those aspects?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there's a few different aspects of it that come into play, right? And so with 30WG is the one we're referring to being closed here. So with that one specifically, when you look at the overall, we'll call it matrix of scoring, where it kind of, I'll say, lost points per se, is mostly in the environmental side of things. And also when looking at the transportation side of it, in general, it offered the least amount of improvement. I mean, specifically when you look at it as an individual structure. But when we even started looking at the combination, because there's that combination there of opening 29 WG and 30 WG, that would open up the through east-west corridor. So that was looked at as an alternative. But based on the traffic volumes that use it and the timelines for going around and those aspects were all considered. And it actually didn't score as well as some of these other alternatives. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down it lost some points and costs. Obviously, the more structures replaced, the more it costs. So it loses out on some of the economic side of things. And then in the natural environment area, because it's a red side days habitat, and there's potential impacts to the watercourse, and there's a wetland, the Irvine Creek wetland complex in there. So those are taken into consideration. And I will note, we look at these criteria, natural environment, transportation, et cetera. They're kind of looked at on an equal basis. So everything kind of equally weighted. We did do a sensitivity analysis, which looks at, putting some more weight on, say, the natural environment side, more weight on the transportation side. And we looked at kind of 9 different weighting criteria in general. The recommended 21 and 29 still scored the highest in at least 6 of those, or 6 or 7 of those 9 criteria. And then in the other weighted ones, which were more heavily weighted on the transportation side and less, say, on the environmental side, that's when all bridges replaced was kind of considered higher. But at 7 out of the 9 weighting scenarios, took into consideration that what was recommended here. It wasn't quite, you know, the advantage of 30WG didn't quite make it to all bridges being replaced. So.
And with the mayor's permission, just a follow up, I haven't heard either of you speaking to the historical significance of that space and that bridge and that road. So, so it may not have gained the points that it needed in elsewhere. And I'm not one to always be fighting for bridges. I understand the cost and I understand the impact to our township, but I also can't not hear what our farming community is saying about their concerns about shutting this down. So I'm looking for ways to possibly add a little bit of hope to this with regards to the historical significance.
Yeah, well, through you, Mayor Waters, with regard to the historical aspect of that bridge, we did an in-depth cultural heritage study, a heritage impact assessment, and also a cultural heritage assessment, and then a heritage impact evaluation. And through both of those considerations, we did evaluate the significance historically for that particular structure and what that means to the community. It is kind of unique in its steel truss nature, but through that process, it was deemed to be like that particular structure cannot be rehabilitated to a point where it can be reused. So we found some ways to properly memorialize that structure at the time in which it would be decommissioned.
Councillor Wilton.
Thank you, Mayor Waters, and thank you, Adam, for the presentation. Just on that 30WG, I went through all the comments this morning that were submitted from the Public Information Center number 2, and the majority of those comments were to see it removed and or converted to a active transportation type of structure that would include snowmobiling, horses, the whole works of active transportation, because there is quite a few horses out there. So I'm just curious in terms of the closing, I did not see many comments that were too concerned about it being closed. And I was also thinking that a lot of people, it's been closed for what, 15 years, I think. So something like that. So I think the comment was that a lot of people have kind of figured out other ways to get around that area. But I was curious about the active transportation component of how closely that was looked at in terms of converting that from a vehicle and farm vehicle safe bridge to a more active transportation and pedestrian types bridge.
We, through you, Mayor Waters, we did take a look at our current active transportation plan, and that particular structure was not identified as part of that. However, considerations were given for that in that if, you know, the economic aspect to create a bridge that's suitable for horseback, four-wheelers, or whatever would be to the same exponential cost of a complete replacement of a road bridge. They're very comparable. So it's found to be not super economical, even though it's not outfitted for you know, suited for both vehicles and other recreational uses.
Thank you for that. And I do recognize the need for farm vehicles to get around. So I just appreciate my colleagues' comments and just, but in terms of this particular bridge, it does seem like it's maybe okay for them to go around and use 6 line. There were a lot of comments in the public comments about the safety, and having lived right up north of that intersection, having east-west traffic open again, that 4-way stop would become quite dangerous again. That'd be a difficult intersection. The traffic moves very quickly on 6 line because it's one of the only paved north-south roads, so it moves very fast along there. So, so I think you've done a good job. I think it's been very thorough, and thank you for the analysis on this piece work. Thank you.
Councillor Addams.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thanks, Adam, for the report. I think you answered one of my questions, and that was whether the criteria is like given equal weight. So it sounds like they are, but then you do run these other scenarios, and still that alternative kind of showed up. So I just wanted to confirm. So the impact on farm vehicles, but more particularly what I was interested in was the emergency response time for emergency management vehicles. That falls within the transportation criteria, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Maybe through you, Mayor Waters, Andrew might be able to elaborate a little bit more on all the criteria that, like, yeah, it's part of the transportation, but yeah.
Okay. Andrew?
Do you have any specific questions related to that? I'm happy to provide more context.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, because I know like in the replacement order, the transportation on 21 was actually rated a little bit higher. So for me, I feel like safety is always like number one. So if we looked at just like that emergency response time element alone, where does that fit in? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you were to look at the transportation aspect alone, I think on the scoring there, I'd have to relook at the numbers. But yes, we're trying. Basically, we looked at 3 of the criteria. We eliminated the environmental criteria out of the timing for priority because those impacts kind of happen regardless of, or those mitigation for those impacts happen regardless of when you do it. But the other, items can be affected with time. Improvements earlier help earlier. But yes, if you were to look specifically at, let's say, the transportation side, 21WG offers the best improvements to response times for emergency. And that's mainly because of there's a weighting in there for emergency response times, with most of the first response coming out of the Fergus area. So they would have to travel north and then backtrack basically back down to the properties north of 29WG, whereas the other kind of areas are more accessible off of 19 without as much of a detour. So that's why 21WG in there does provide, yes, from the emergency response part of the transportation, it's the highest rated, but not necessarily for the other aspects of the transportation. Like I think 29WG was, I'd have to verify before I speak, but I think 29WG offered more improvement in terms of like the local community travel and the farm travel. So it's kind of a balance, trying to look at all aspects of it to determine priority. But I mean, it's a guideline. If the township so wished to decide to weight the emergency response more heavily, then that could be evaluated too. So.
Okay, any other more comments, questions? Councillor Craddock.
Just one question about the EA exemption. You had mentioned that's like contingent on criteria that the townships are responsible for. Does that put the township at any risk if that's not adhered to?
Through you, Mayor Waters, with respect to what that would translate to at the time of reconstruction for each of these bridges, we've through the heritage impact assessment, things like were identified like a interpretive plaque, which we commonly put at each of the sites when we're replacing a bridge of a significant age. And as on the one slide, I showed that the imprint of like the structure in the concrete, that archway. So if we do that kind of element, and then filing our cultural heritage reports with the local historical societies. And finally, one unique thing with Bridge 29WG, through that heritage impact assessment, some of the workers' names were found to be on some of the concrete. So if we can preserve that piece of concrete, then that coupled with a document and salvage report, which we've already conducted through the study process, those elements are all done, then it won't be elevated to the full municipal class EA. So I have a pretty good notion that these things are very easy to accomplish. Yeah.
Any further comments or questions? I'd like to compliment our staff, our team, led by Adam, and as well as our consultant Burnside, for I'll call it a triaging the process here. It's we've done this a few times now, and it seems to be. I'm really impressed at how well it has gone in terms of sort of the process and engaging the public, and because these obviously matters can be very sensitive to each members of those particular communities, and how farm equipment move around, just even how people move around. But I got to compliment the folks here engaged with the community, that this process has gone generally fairly well, and the response by the community has been very helpful in terms of the process and making us aware of the importance of each of the bridges. So it's not easy, and obviously sort of coming to a point where you make a decision in terms of whether a bridge is no longer viable or part of that process is always a difficult thing. But I again just want to compliment the group here by sort of doing this in a very sensitive way, and again, thank you for that. So with that being said, I will read the recommendation that the Council of Township of Centre Wellington endorse alternative number 8, replacement of bridges 21WG and 29WG, and the removal without replacement of bridge 30WG as outlined in report number IS 2025-04, dated February 9th, 2026, and that Council directs staff to publish the notice of study completion for the Bridge and Transportation Network study of bridges 21WG, 29WG, and 30WG. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Jefferson, seconder on that. Councillor McDonald, any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is so moved. Thank you. We'll now move down to item 9.3, Housing Enabling Water System Fund Transfer Payment Agreement. And we have another Adam up here, Adam McNabb.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. Through you, this report recommends Council approve a bylaw authorizing the Township Chief Administrative Officer and the Managing Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer to execute the Ontario Transfer Payment Agreement regarding the Housing Enabling Water Systems Fund. This agreement establishes the framework for the grant that the Township was successful for pertaining to the design and construction of external works required to service the South Fergus Secondary Plan area, and provides approximately $6.8 million in provincial funding to help build more than 3,000 new homes in the Township of Centre Wellington. The agreement and supporting documentation are included in the agenda package, and with that, I'm happy to take any questions the council may have.
Thank you, Adam. Comments, questions for Adam as it relates to this item? Okay. I'll read the recommendation of the Council of Township of Centre Wellington passed a bylaw authorizing the Township Chief Administrative Officer and the Managing Director of Corporate Services Treasurer to execute the Ontario Transfer Payment Agreement regarding the Housing Enabling Water System Fund Intake 2. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor McDonald, second on that. Councillor Craddock, any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's so moved. Thank you. And now we'll move down to bylaws. First bylaw, 2026-11, a bylaw authorizing the Township Chief Administrative Officer and Managing Director of Corporate Service Treasurer to execute the Ontario Transfer Payment Agreement regarding the Housing Enabling Water System Fund Intake 2. Next, 2026-12, a bylaw to designate the property municipally known as 179 Victoria Crescent, Elora, in the Township of Centre Wellington as a property of cultural heritage value and or interest pursuant to Section 28 29, Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next, 2026-13, a bylaw to designate the property municipally known as 64 Cobourn Street, Elora, in the Township of Centre Wellington as a property of cultural heritage value and or interest pursuant to Section 29, Part 4 of Ontario Heritage Act. Next, 2026-14, a bylaw to designate the property municipally known as 7324 Wellington Road, 21 Pilkington, the Township of Centre Wellington, as a property of culturally heritage value and or interest pursuant to Section 29, Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Recommendation that bylaws 2026-11 through 2026-14 be read a first, second, and third time and passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, and corporate seal affixed. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Craddock, seconder on that. Councillor Wilton. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none. All those in favor? So moved. Notice of motions. Motions where notice have been given. Confirmatory bylaw. A bylaw to confirm the actions of council. Recommendation that bylaw 2026-15 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held February 9th, 2026 be introduced a first, second, and third time and passed in open council. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor McDonald, seconder on that. Councillor Jefferson. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? So moved. Do I have a mover for adjournment? Councillor Wilton. Seconder on that, Councillor Adams. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? So moved. You all have a good night.